On the phone with us right now is one of the new experts. I mean, actually, prior to him joining PSA, this guy was the go-to guy. Always has been the go-to guy when it comes to autographs.
Expert in a new.
He's the go-to guy.
He's the hot guy, so PSA grabbed him.
Oh, yeah, he is.
But he was an expert before he came.
He's a rock star.
He was like a free agent. He was the.
Who are you guys talking about?
He was the Gordon Hayward.
Not like Rico in '78 free agent.
Exactly. He was the.
I wish I would have been a free agent just once.
More like a Bryce Harper in 2008.
Kevin, how are you?
Kevin, how you doing? Kevin Keating from PSA. How are you, Kev?
Doing great. How you guys doing?
Good.
I wanted to ask you about the Senate page collection in the Golden auction. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great find. Really unbelievable. I spent the last 30 years of my life, hoping and praying one day I'd have an opportunity to buy something like this. And I always believed that there must be somewhere out there a 19th century autograph book with baseball players inside. And I bought whatever I could over the years, but you only ever find people that you never heard of, and or politicians of the day. I mean, think about it. In the 19th century, the only people collecting autographs would have been people who would have been living in the cities, predominantly in the Northeast, like Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia, possibly Chicago, as far west as Chicago. But other than that, in America, where was anybody going to collect autographs? Because not only would you have to have the interest in those people, but you'd have to have access, right? And if you're living outside of those major metropolitan areas, you're not going to meet anybody famous. It's just not going to happen. So, so autograph books from that period are enormously rare. Whatever was collected at that time has since been destroyed, lost, burned up in a fire, donated to the paper drives, World War I and World War II, or simply sold and then broken up over time. To find intact autograph albums from the 1900s, the 19th century, the 1800s, although they do exist, they're so enormously rare, and they're relegated to politicians and not baseball players. I mean, who was collecting baseball autographs in the 1800s, right?
Yeah. Yeah, then I don't think they had pens then. So.
Yeah, right. I mean,
quills.
Quills. Right. So I've read about, and we probably all have heard about, the famous Mike King Kelly. Died, I think, in 1894.
Very young.
37.
Yep.
Yeah, 37 years old, I think.
Yep.
And also considered to be the first rock star baseball players. The stories go that kids would follow him to the ballpark, and they would ask him for autographs, and that was an anomaly. That was a really weird thing for people to ask a baseball player for their autographs. So they wrote stories about that, about how famous this guy was. And so I always thought, well, maybe buried in one of these rare autograph books that I'll come across one day, I'll see a Mike King Kelly. And that's really what I was looking for over the last few decades. I never found a baseball player in the few autograph books from that time that I've handled. And then when I was at the National this summer, Golden Auctions asked me to come over to take a look at this, and I really, my jaw dropped to the floor when I saw it. There were two albums from the 1892 they dated. Yeah, Jesus. And one signed by the Congress of the United States from that period, 1892, and then it has some random...
Wait a second, the Congress, the entire Congress?
The entire Congress.
Holy cow.
And when I say that, I mean, I didn't research it to the point that I verified that 100% of the congressional members had signed it. But in essence, you have the whole Congress and the Senate has signed that book. And then there's some Supreme Court justices in that book as well. And then there are a few added autographs over the next 10 years or so. And then there was an autograph in there as late as like 1920 or 22, something like that. But then in the separate book, that was the baseball book, and there were far fewer autographs in there, but the autographs represented 5 different teams. There were There were members of the 1892 Washington Senators, the 1892 Boston Bean Eaters, the 1892 Cleveland Spiders, and the 1892 Louisville Colonels. And then there was also one or two pages that had most of the 1924 Senators team. That's the only Washington team to ever win the World Series.
Yeah,
Your team,
And
yeah, I remember.
yeah, and those guys included Walter Johnson, and that particular team, of course, was the toast of the town at that time. So it makes sense that the family members who owned this book at the time would have added those guys. But other than that, it was 19th century baseball players.
So what was the crown jewel in that book?
Well, for me, there were really two of them, and that was Frank Soleil, who died in, I believe, 1911, and George Stacey Davis, who died in 1940, but remarkably is one of the most rare autographs of all the Hall of Fame members to obtain. When he got into the Hall of Fame in 1995, the Hall couldn't even find a living relative. So they normally, and I'm sure you know this, Rico, they'll hand the plaque to, the wife or some family member of, a distant family member, if it has to be that way. But somebody from the family will receive the plaque when the guy is actually, inducted on stage. And then, in this case, Leonard Coleman, president of the National League, received the plaque because they couldn't find a family member. And I did a lot of research because the only other two Davis autographs that have ever surfaced, I've actually owned at different times. And I was there at that induction, incidentally, as well. And I ended up providing the Hall of Fame with one of the autographs that I had at the time, as a reference for their files. But he got in, and I came to find out that he actually, his last 20 or so years, there's very little known about his life because he had been committed somewhere to an asylum of some sort, and there really isn't much known about that period of his life.
Wait a minute, who is this?
This is Davis, George
okay.
Stacey Davis.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of rarity and value, those are the two crown jewels. In terms of name recognition, you've got like a third-year young pitcher named Cy Young, who signed his name Denton Young.
Yeah.
Because that was his given name, was Denton Young. So that's pretty cool. There's a Jesse Burkett, which is a very rare Hall of Fame autograph. There's William Dummy Hoy.
Sure, Dummy
Hoy.
And Dummy Hoy, I believe, should be in the Hall of Fame.
I agree with that. I agree. Totally agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you kidding me? I wrote about him. He's absolutely. Hey, Kevin, before we let you go, two questions. Number one, what do you anticipate this collection is going to sell for?
Well, that's one. Where's the second one?
The second one.
Golden asked me to. Golden asked me to evaluate. They broke it up.
Oh, they did.
Broke
Okay.
up the book. Yes. So they broke up the book, and they asked me to give them some value ranges, which I did. And I believe the value ranges that I gave, I thought were very realistic. And I always plan value ranges for a bad sale, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
So, so I think my value ranges added up to 50 to 100,000. I think the retail value of the book is far greater than that. When I say the book, I mean the composite values of the individual parts, because now it's individual parts. But I think it could go. They could realize a heck of a lot more money than that if the word gets out and the right people are bidding. I mean, this is really exciting stuff. If you're a baseball autograph collector.
The last question, John Claxon. What would you do if I told you that there's potentially another John Claxon, or maybe is it the first John Claxon autograph is going to surface? Would you come up to authenticate it?
Well, I'd love to authenticate a John Clarkson. I mean, you can count on your hand the number of real ones that exist, if at all. He's enormously rare.
Well, this one would be the real deal. And the only reason I'm saying that is because it was brought to my attention through through a friend of mine. As you know, that he wound up in an insane asylum. And, and it happened to be McLean Hospital up here in Belmont, in the Boston area. And they have an archive, and they have every single piece of documentation from every patient that's ever been in there. So as we speak, they are digging for a John Clarkson signature.
Don't get your hopes up. It's been about a year now.
Yeah, well, actually, let me tell you something. They're looking. I mean, they are really looking. So it's going to be interesting.
What a great find. And isn't the story of how he actually wound up there was because he had a nervous breakdown?
Correct.
As a result of watching his catcher slide under a train while they were waiting at a train track, and he slipped on ice or something and slipped under a train, and his legs got cut off. Is that correct?
That I don't know. That's something I'm going to take a look at and research. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on board, man. We love having you, and we got to get you on. Well, actually, you are going to start coming on more often. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you are now in the PSA rotation, as they say.
Okay, but listen, I just wish I was a little more excited about this autograph collection. You know, I might have talked more.
All right, Kev, thanks so much for your time. Kevin Keating from PSA. Take care.